Welcome, everybody. Hi. We're honored to be here. I see a lot of people in the chat. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the webinar on growing the alternatives hosted by Greenpeace International. We're very glad to have you all here. While we wait for others to join, we invite you to use the chat function to introduce yourself, your organization or network, and tell us where you have connected from. To start, we invite you to follow these collective agreements, which are very important. Ask your questions through the Q&A. This is a function in Zoom and the Facebook, of course, and YouTube chat. You can use them also. Respect each other and refrain from spamming chat. If any attendee abides the agreements, we reserve the right to remove them from the space. So respect is the most important. Also, this event is being recorded and live streamed to Facebook and YouTube. And in these QRs that you have seen, you have the access to the Growing the Alternatives publication and map that we're presenting here today. Interpretation is available, of course, in English, French, Arabic, Spanish, and International Sign Language. To access this, please select the globe icon titled Interpretation and select the language you wish to listen in. You may use mute original audio to only hear the interpreter's voice, not my voice. I am honored to be your moderator today. My name is Monica Fonseca, journalist, environmentalist, and US-born Latina that had the privilege to be raised in Colombia, South America, who is convinced that we can change things together. And I'm excited to be joined by our panelists today to discuss the importance of exploring how to grow the alternatives to the current socioeconomic model and some of the promising initiatives that are emerging around the world. I'm very proud to introduce the panelists that are joining us today. We will begin with Dewande Omotoso. She is a South African-based novelist, architect, and designer who was born in Barbados and grew up in Nigeria. She has worked as a storytelling consultant, constructing narratives for Greenpeace International, where she currently collaborates with the Alternative Futures program, under which this online panel is designed. Also, we're going to have Chikumbutso Gosi. Hi. Let's say hi. Yeah, let's say hi. It's that time to say hi, of course, to our dear guests. Jawande, hi.
Greetings. Thank you so much.
And I will introduce the others too. So I continue with Chikumbutso Gosi. We're very proud to have her here also. Is the Actions AIDS International Program Director for Young Urban Women, Life Choices and Livelihoods Program, where she leads the design, implementation, research, and technology-driven innovations of programs to advance rights of women and girls. Chikumbutso Gosi is a feminist economist, activist with over 16 years of experience in international development. She's a founding member of the Feminist MacroEconomic Alliance in Malawi. Chikumbutso, hi.
Hi, thank you so much.
We're very proud to have you here. And I must say that she's also collaborating in writing a piece for the publication Growing the Alternative. So we're very glad that you're joining this adventure today. We also have Teresa Correa and Gustavo Salas, the Cecosesola cooperative that consists of 50+ community organizations integrated into a network of production of goods and services that brings together more than 23,000 associates from the popular sectors. This network develops a wide variety of activities such as agriculture production, small-scale agri-industrial production, funeral services, health services, saving and loans, mutual aid funds, and food distribution through a transformative educational process based on equity, mutual support, and responsibility. Gross income are more than $100 million per year, generating more than $20 million in community savings. Our panelists will share their insights on the challenges and limitations of the current model, highlighting the need for a more sustainable, equitable, and just future. But before, I'm going to say hi to Teresa and Gustavo. Teresa and Gustavo will speak in Spanish, and they have a person, Manny, who is going to be with them. Hi, Teresa. Hi, Gustavo. Hi, Manny.
Hola, salud.
Buenos días, muchas gracias por esta oportunidad. Buenas tardes y buenas noches.
Así es. Buenos días, buenas tardes y buenas noches. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. To start, I'd like to ask Jawande from the Alternative Futures program, why is it important to talk about alternative for Greenpeace participation of Jawande Omotso is now with you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Warm greetings to everybody here. Thanks for joining us. This is wonderful, and I'm just filled up with good energy. So as said, yes, my name is Yewande, and I'm just going to start by talking a bit about what sort of brings us here and create a context. I mean, at Greenpeace, for many years now, we've been pushing for and talking about the unfolding crises of the climate, but also biodiversity, and also about the collapse of the ecosystems. And the fact that these crises are really due to over-extraction of natural resources, and also the volume of products made and consumed. The other part of that is ascribing that crisis to especially wealthy countries and corporations, and making them, holding them to account as the main sort of people responsible. And the other side of ascribing that responsibility is acknowledging that those who pay the most for these crises, unfortunately, and the spaces that pay the most is the nature in and the people in global South countries. This pattern of exploitation and people paying for these crises is really centuries old. and we can track it right back to colonization. If we move forward in time and you think of the 1950s, in the 1950s, there emerged a metric, a system of measurement to look at profit and the growth of countries, and a kind of like an obsession with this way of measuring. And we call that GDP, gross domestic profit. Could I have the first slide, please? So the slide you're looking at here actually is in the report that Monica was talking about, and I'll say more about that report shortly. It's a report called Growing the Alternatives, but this is a particular slide we wanted to show you now, because in this slide, we're trying to visualize how the extraction of materials and emissions of greenhouse gases follow this exact, almost same trajectory as the explosion of growth and GDP. So there you see this cause and effect, really. What I want to do next shortly is show you a short video to talk more about this context and the work that we're doing. So if you could please play the short video, and then we'll come back and speak some more. Thank you.
Growing rather than one that meets the needs of people. Our planet's resources aren't infinite, so we cannot have infinite growth. The exploitation of nature and pollution of ecosystems have brought about the climate crisis, the extinction of species, and has also led to social conflicts. If we continue down this path, the future that awaits us will be hostile to all forms of life. Those with economic and political power want to convince us that there is no alternative to the current dominant economic model. Is there really no solution? Of course there is. Indeed, there are many existing alternatives in our present, such as the commons, a governance model that brings power back to the people. It is a way for people to organize together to meet their needs and enhance their resilience. Slow circular economy, a production system that slows down the rapid production and consumption of new goods and reduces extraction of resources and energy. Economy for the common good, an approach that puts basic human values such as dignity and solidarity above the need for individual or corporate profit. Cooperatives, a business model for organizations in which members share ownership, decision-making, and benefits, promoting equality and collaboration. To move in this direction, governments, companies, communities, and organizations should base their actions on these principles that envision the landscape for an alternative future. And if all of this seems utopian, there are real-life examples where people are already building these futures today. Greenpeace International has collected stories that show such realities in a document called Growing the Alternatives, where you can learn how these futures are being built. Alternatives are there, we just need to grow them.
Thank you. So, how do we grow them? How do we start to counter the status quo of a system based on infinite growth and GDP, and a system that works so hard to embed in the globalized mindset notions of profit at all ends, inequality, exploitation, and consumerism? How do we counter that? It can often seem quite overwhelming. That the current polycrisis reveals the flaws of this destructive socioeconomic system. And while we don't at all accept the progressive destruction of the ecosystem, the prevalence of poverty, inequality, violence in our societies, we also challenge the idea that we need to replace Western capitalism with this one magical thing that's going to solve everything. In other words, we challenge the idea that there is only one form of an alternative, and we need to find that thing, and then all countries must follow it. Please put in the slide. Could we have the next slide with the principles? There it is. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So instead of pushing for this idea of this one answer, instead we did a lot of work and research and reached out and put together a set of 9 principles and 27 proposals. And these were mentioned, it was touched on a bit just now in the video we watched. And in the report, Growing the Alternatives, we really visualized these principles and proposals, and the image you see there, as a tree. You know, this sort of this ecosystem of branches and roots through which to tackle the polycrisis and build alternative futures. There's of course no time, and the text might be small, so there's not necessarily time right now to go through these principles and proposals, but they're available to you if you download the publication, Growing the Alternatives. We'll give you all the connections to do that shortly. And I invite everyone to do that and tell your friends. But examples of some of these principles and proposals include, for instance, the principle of well-being at the core, holding that principle. And one of the proposals underpinning that principle is to go beyond GDP and challenge the relevance of growth. Another example of a principle, for instance, is the principle of people and planet above profit and growth. And one of the proposals under that principle is prioritizing people and planet over the repayment of a country's debt. So that gives you a bit of an example of how the principles and proposals work together. And as I said, you can go beyond, today and explore that deeper for yourselves. And maybe we missed things and you can add, right? It's not like a final thing. But, we can only bring these alternative futures into being if we work together. And I think that's something we all understand. So we asked academics, organizations, and activists who'd been working on aspects of those principles and proposals, who'd been working in this space of alternatives. We asked them to put forward and to contribute to this publication, Growing the Alternatives. If we could have the final slide, please. So this is the publication that in many ways brings us here. And I just wanted to mention and introduce my colleague, Madeline Cobing, who's an independent research consultant and really spearheaded the making of this publication. The publication takes the form of 3 chapters. The first chapter is entitled An Alternative Political and Economic Landscape, where we introduce this context, but also the possibility of alternatives, because often we can be so overwhelmed by what is not working. We can't get sight of what could work better. The second chapter is entitled Market-Facing Alternatives. We thought this was important. So often, people dismiss these ideas, these alternative ideas. They say it's too fluffy, you can't scale it, it's utopian. And we thought it was important to have a whole chapter dedicated to the ways in which these ideas are robust and exist in the space of market. And then the last chapter, System Change from the Ground Up, is this wonderful collection of case studies, stories of inspiration, communities, people, organizations, really living these alternatives today, not sometime in the future. So these contributors all brought their own views and perspectives, and between them, they show multiple ways that we can reimagine a future where profit and growth are not the overriding consideration. If we put people and the planet first, we can create pathways for change that could build resilience in a fluctuating world, reduce our impacts on the climate, reduce the biodiversity loss, fight inequity, and ensure well-being of all and of planet. And this is why, like I said, there's such a good feeling today, and it's so great to just be here. And it's amazing to have 2 of the contributors to the magazine, as Monica mentioned, 2 of those contributors on our call today. I'm really looking forward to learning more about the ways in which they're changing mindsets and creating these alternative futures that we're speaking about. But with that, I'm going to hand back to you, Monica. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jawande. Thank you very much. And actually, I would like to especially thank you and Madeleine for doing this possible. This conversation is vital for the moment that we are all living. And I am very glad that it's women who are leading this conversation. Not that we don't need men, but women are very important in this conversation. So for setting the context, thank you very much again. This is very important, as we all already said, this conversation with our audience too. We're reading our questions. They'll be here with us in a moment, those questions. Let's take it further and hear from our guests today, from our panelists. Why is it important to discuss alternatives to the current socioeconomic model, referencing the predominant capitalist and extractivist and colonizing model? So let's hear from Chikumbutso Gossi. What are some of the pressing issues that the current model fails to address effectively, especially for women? In your experience, for sure, of course, what changes have you seen in people's lives after implementing alternatives?
Thank you so much, moderator, and greetings all from the warm heart of Africa, Malawi. Like I said, I work with ActionAid, and I'm a founding member of Feminist MacroEconomic Alliance in Malawi. That means that most of the information that I will bring on this platform, in particular, this webinar, comes from and is informed by the movements of young women, feminist organizations from the Global South. To start with, when it comes to the discussion on why advancing feminist alternatives is important, I think that aligns well with our vision and our quest to achieve a feminist just future. When we're talking about a feminist just future, it is about reorganizing our economy, reorganizing our society, and reorganizing our politics with care at the center. And a care-centered approach entails investing in alternative approaches that can replace the current dominant neoliberal capitalist economic model that places emphasis on growth, which is quite often achieved through neoliberal economic tenets of privatization, deregulation, contractionary fiscal policies for most of us that are in the global south that are experiencing austerity measures as part of deregulation and austerity measures, and many other things that have proven to be detrimental to women's rights, especially those that face intersectionalistics and marginalization from the global south. So when it comes to the problems that we are currently experiencing, to start with, I think it is the ongoing crisis of climate change. We've seen the crisis of debt, especially for countries in the global south. We are seeing conflicts. We are seeing the rising food and fuel prices, which are enough, I think, to wake as a wake-up call for countries in the global south to seriously start considering alternatives. And most importantly, these, I think, for us, have much more devastating gender impacts on women, and it exposes and illuminates the realities of structural inequalities that exist in our countries. Thus, for us, more than ever, there is an urgent need to reorient our social and economic models towards alternatives that are just and feminist. And this kind of a future that is just and feminist requires all of us, because when it comes to the challenges that countries in the global south, especially young women, are experiencing because of the greed that is existing because of the current economic models, there are many. This includes the issues of lack of access to public services. We are talking about the debt crisis, which I've already highlighted. And I think the future that we require, if we are to transition to a feminist just future, is a future that prioritizes care. It is a future that prioritizes the well-being and not profits. It is a future that prioritizes gender equality and prioritizes inclusion. And I think these have been something that many of the movements from the global south, including the movement that I come from, the Feminist MacroEconomic Alliance, have been calling for a long time. But I think despite all these calls, it seems like the world is not ready to change. But I think if the world is not ready to change, at least the feminist movements from the world, from the global south, we are ready and we really want to change this. Where do we draw our power and strength from? We know very well that from the time it's in history, we have had challenges, oppression, like slave trade. But I think this we have been able to conquer. And very true that even this one, if we unite as as a movement in the global world, I think it is very possible for us to defeat the greed that exists and achieve a feminist future that is just. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I was looking for the mic. Sometimes it happens. Now we're going with Teresa Correa and Gustavo Salas. And it is also important to hear from you, to listen what you have to say. You have an experience, a huge experience. Why is it becoming increasingly urgent to seek out transformative solutions? And what does Cecosesola Cooperative has been working on to face the current model?
Empieza Manny.
Manny, adelante, Manny, adelante.
Saludos para todos. Bueno, cuando hablamos de la importancia de desarrollar nuevas alternativas, nosotros pensamos que la dicotomía mercado-estado no ha funcionado. Los intentos para producir cambios profundos en las relaciones humanas, de arriba hacia abajo, han generado resultados un tanto frustrantes. Nosotros creemos que ya es hora de ver en nuestras comunidades alternativas que inspiren la posibilidad de vivir en un mundo justo, en armonía con nuestro ambiente. Las relaciones terminan constreñidas en un modelo convencional de empresa, limitando nuestro desarrollo personal e inhibiendo la posibilidad de descubrir nuevas formas de transformación personal. En el sur global, pareciese que estuviésemos un poco atascados, siguiendo los parámetros de la sociedad capitalista, en la cual nosotros vemos cómo se nos ha ido desarrollando una mezcla cultural que pareciese priorizar o darle mayor importancia a la acumulación individualista de poder, de riqueza, para el beneficio personal y de la familia inmediata. El modelo socioeconómico desarrollado en el norte va de la mano con estructuras jerárquicas, las cuales pareciesen ser aceptadas en nuestra sociedad sin ningún tipo de cuestionamiento. Estas estructuras funcionan como la correa de transmisión de las emociones y la lógica de la cultura dominante, las cuales nos constriñen bajo aquellos parámetros de competencia, de relaciones de dominio, sumergiéndonos en aquella acumulación de riqueza, de poder, las cuales pretenden o tienden a eliminar las culturas tradicionales. Por lo tanto, estamos viviendo un capitalismo aún más destructivo. En Venezuela lo llamamos capitalismo salvaje. Prevalecen la corrupción y la destrucción de nuestro ambiente. Replicando el modelo socioeconómico del norte, estamos favoreciendo e impulsando su dominio en todo el sur global. Nosotros estamos enfrentando el desafío de seguir desarrollando progresivamente nuestra propia forma o nuestra propia manera de organizarnos, con una mezcla cultural como el punto de partida para el desarrollo de un proceso de transformación cultural enriquecido por nuestras culturas tradicionales. En esto, el sur global pareciese tener una ventaja un tanto formidable, ya que tenemos nuestra memoria cultural un poco más a la mano o un poco más cerca, sobre todo en las zonas rurales. Tal vez sea esto de lo que se trata Cecosesola.
Si quieres, no sé si ahorita mismo me pongo, Mónica, para conversar sobre cuáles son las alternativas que hemos estado construyendo como Red Cecosesola frente a este capitalismo salvaje que mencionaba Manny.
Yeah, Teresa, perfect. We can continue with that question, which is the second question. So let me just rephrase a little bit in English so people can understand what you're gonna continue with. So what factors need to be considered when transitioning to a new model in a specific country or region? Teresa is going to explain this in Spanish, but I would like Gustavo also to explain a little bit more. And of course, Chikum and Jawande can join the conversation when they finish explaining. So Teresa, adelante por favor, hablemos un poco de eso para que puedan seguir las demás panelistas. And then when they finish, we will go into the Q&A questions from the audience, okay? Teresa, adelante.
En Cecosesola Gracias. En Cecosesola nosotros hemos ido trascendiendo progresivamente el modelo cooperativo tradicional. O sea, no esperen una cooperativa común y corriente. Nosotros tenemos unas formas radicalmente diferentes a lo que se entiende normalmente como la empresa privada o la empresa pública. Tenemos muchas diferencias porque vemos que el capitalismo es sobre todo relaciones entre personas. Entonces, nosotros lo primero que trabajamos en nuestras reflexiones es ir trascendiendo las relaciones jerárquicas. Nosotros no nos guiamos por estatutos o por cuestiones escritas. Nosotros vamos construyendo criterios a través del consenso. Nosotros no votamos en nuestras reuniones. Estamos hablando de más de 3.000 reuniones todo el año entre 150 o 200 personas en muchos espacios, porque el voto divide entre ganadores y perdedores. Nosotros inclusive, si alguien toma una decisión que estando solo toma la decisión, esa decisión es consensuada si está basada en los criterios que hemos ido construyendo. Contrariamente a lo que marcan las pautas de los economistas y las escuelas tradicionales de economía, nosotros no creemos en la especialización, nosotros rotamos en nuestras tareas, compartimos nuestros conocimientos, porque también todos tenemos el mismo ingreso semanal, exceptuando algunos compañeros médicos en el área de los servicios de salud. Ese mismo ingreso personal también nos permite rotar y aprender y enseñar a todos los que están a nuestro alrededor. Una cosa importante, no nos guiamos por los precios del mercado. Nuestros precios se basan tanto de los servicios como de los productos en los costos de producción que nosotros hemos establecido. Una cosa fundamental es que no perseguimos fines de lucro. O sea, no estamos en esa carrera del sistema por el lucro, por la utilización de las personas, de las cosas, sino en una construcción de respeto. Todos nuestros servicios en las diferentes áreas son autofinanciados. Eso nos da autonomía y para nosotros es realmente muy importante. Otro elemento fundamental es la información. Nosotros no tenemos secreto. La información fluye para acá, para allá, e inclusive cuando hay situaciones dolorosas, por ejemplo, de un robo, de alguna situación dolorosa para el grupo, eso también se conversa, porque eso es un insumo para nuestro proceso educativo, porque aprendemos reflexionando sobre los errores y sobre los aciertos que vamos teniendo. Nosotros trabajamos fundamentalmente en equipos y dentro de un mercado muy competitivo. Es bueno señalar que estamos viviendo en Venezuela. Muchos de ustedes conocerán la situación tan difícil que tenemos, tanto política como socioeconómica, y dentro de ese ambiente tan difícil es que nos hemos desarrollado como organización comunitaria. En cuanto a la parte ecológica, hemos venido dando pasos pequeños, pero muy firmes en torno a ser ecológicamente responsables. Ahora, todo esto que hablamos de las cantidades que nosotros manejamos, la cantidad de servicios que nos prestamos, no tendría ningún sentido y se volvería un caos si no hubiera un proceso educativo profundo de manera permanente. Se volvería el caos, sería un desastre. Entonces, cuando alguien dice, se puede replicar la experiencia de Cecosesola, nosotros lo que decimos es, sí se puede, si hubiera esa intención, ese deseo de ser diferentes, de tener relaciones de responsabilidad, de respeto, porque nosotros entendemos que el capitalismo no está afuera, está dentro de cada uno de nosotros, cuando somos manipuladores, cuando somos utilizadores de los demás, cuando no respetamos al otro, a la otra o al ambiente que nos rodea. Entonces, por eso decimos que si queremos replicar esta experiencia cooperativa de 56 años, tenemos que tener la intención, porque es una emoción, de construir aquí y ahora el mundo que queremos, porque el cambio comienza por nosotros mismos.
Adelante, Guillermo, que nos encantaría oír también de ti. Please, Guillermo. Gustavo can continue. There's no Guillermo here, there's a Gustavo, I'm sorry.
No, yo estoy aquí para la pregunta. Ya los compañeros hicieron la intervención y con mucho gusto participo cuando haya la pregunta.
Okay. So fantastic. So what we think we should do now is that we have time. Oh, well, the same question. And who would like to begin? I think Jawanda can begin answering this question. And then Chikum, you can also answer this question. But then we're going to have the Q&A because we do have a lot of questions from the audience. So Jawanda, would you like to add to this conversation, please?
Thank you, Monica. I'd actually like to invite my colleague because she is here attending. Maddie, yeah, can I bring you onto stage, Madeline, just to join us in the conversation? Thank you.
Yes. How can we bring these alternatives into being? I mean, I think the more and the different things that there are, the greater mass of examples we have, and also the more we work together. And I would greatly echo what was said by Cecosesola about the mindset of capitalism being embedded in us. I mean, as a person in the global north, this is really apparent and very obvious. It's difficult to live with. And we have to kind of question ourselves and our own relationships and how we then go about making the change that we want to see in the world happen. So there's that. But I'd also like to echo the fact that there's we don't see many of the alternatives that are really already happening around us. So cooperatives represent, I think, 12% of the world economy, but who knows about that? And they were far more resilient during the financial crash of 2008. Many of the banks that were cooperative based were able to survive and help communities through that crisis. And so we've got examples of where these models are already working and functioning, but they just come under the radar. They're not really seen because we see, the big brands, the great big increases in GDP, and also the terrible events that happen in the world, partly as a result of these big power plays. So yes, I think the mindset change and the fact that we need to see what's going on around us already is what I would say. So I'll pass it back to you, Monica.
Well, Jawanda, would you like to add something to this part, or should we go with Chikum?
Happy to move on. Thank you.
Perfect. Chikum, I would like to add a little bit to this question, and it's what factors need to be considered when transitioning to a new model in a specific country or region? If you can add also to the answer, I would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much. So, like I said, for the Feminist MacroEconomic Alliance, the Young Urban Women Movement, and of course, the men of the movement and ActionAid from the Global South, the shift that we want to see is the feminist well-being economy. And I think we invested lots of time trying to understand what is it this would look like, and what is it that can be done to make sure that we transition to an economy that is just and feminist. And I think we identified two systems of power that have to be addressed. Number one, the young women identified corporate power as very instrumental in terms of being an impediment for the world to transition to a feminist just world. So we said, if we are indeed to transition to an alternative world, we need corporates to be responsible. We need to check the power of our international financial institutions, those that are interested in making profits. Number one. Number two, we also identified the power of national governments. So we noted that most of the times when it comes to corporate power, in most of the times it does connive with the political power. So if you have IFIs, if you have international financial companies coming to countries in the global south, they'll go straight to talk to national governments, talk to ministers, talk to people that are interested with the money so that they can enrich themselves, in a way excluding the rural masses. Because of this, we had said if we were to shift to the next world, we need three things. Number one, we need to build political power. We need people that can check the power of the corporates, that can check the power of national governments. In other words, we are talking about checks and balances. Number two, and this is about building critical consciousness of the rural people, of not just rural people, but of the citizens. So what we are doing under the Feminist Macroeconomics Academy is to invest much more significantly in what is called feminist political education. And through the feminist political education, we have tried to de-eliticize knowledge, because most of the times people think economics is about people that are in the boardrooms, people that speak better English. But I think what we have done through Feminist Macroeconomics Academy and through feminist political education is to de-eliticize this knowledge, to make sure that young people understand the unequal ways in which economic system, in which social system operates and causes all these crises that we have in this world. And I think I'm very glad to say across Malawi, if you come right now, under the Young Urban Women's Movement, you'll find many hubs with young people that are very articulate. They understand very well what is happening. They understand what is climate crisis. They understand what is wrong with the current neoliberal capitalist agenda and who is driving it, and what is it that we can do to make sure that our governments are accountable. But at the same time, I think the young women in particular, they're also aware the extent to which national governments in other countries in the global south can pursue a more feminist just approach. And I think this is a direct call to say the power employed by countries in the global north and international financial institutions and the existence that it has on the global tax and investment policies, I think is very important. So in other words, I think it's about power, management of power, managing the power of corporates, managing the power of countries in the global north, managing the power of our national government, the political elites that participate in making these decisions that in many of the times, it's not to the best interest of the citizens. So like I said, I think we have been talking about feminist political education and how it looks like. I have just a 1-minute video that I really would like to share on this platform, just to say what is it that the young urban women do when it comes to building political knowledge and critical consciousness on the current neoliberal economic policies. Thank you so much.
Once a year, we convene together as young urban women movements. ActionAid's role is really to provide that platform for young women to meet, to talk, to learn from each other, to bond. So we call this the global convening, and it doubles up as what we call a feminist political school.
In the moment that we are in, it's incredibly important, and the most radical thing to do right now is to support the activism and the feminist movement building of young Black feminists.
So we want to achieve a feminist well-being economy by looking at the 5 R's. So these are rewarding, recognizing, redistributing, reclaiming, and reducing.
So it is only us who can fight for ourselves.
Through the political school, we have been able to learn about different.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Monica.
What was it? Did the video finish?
No, it didn't, but I think it was for the interest of time. It's about 2 minutes.
Okay. Okay. I was interested in those R's, the 5 R's. So you can share with us later on if you want. Since we're gonna open this conversation to the audience, we already have some questions. I would like Gustavo, if you don't mind, I'm gonna read this question. This is for everybody. But if Gustavo would like to answer this one, which I think it's very important. Abigail Aguilar on Zoom, she's asking, how can we ensure that these models are culturally sensitive and responsive to local needs? Tikum was talking about that, and that is also important. Thank you very much. It can be answered by any panelist, but I chose Gustavo to answer this question first. And if anyone wants to add, Maddie, or of course, Yewande or Tikum, please go ahead, or Teresa or Mani. Please, Gustavo.
Bueno, la experiencia nuestra es muy concreta, muy metida en los barrios, en los sectores pobres. Entonces, cuando uno está inmerso en las comunidades, y no es aparte de la comunidad, sino es parte de la comunidad, las necesidades van brotando y las soluciones van brotando. O sea, nosotros nunca nos hemos planteado de ir a las comunidades a organizarlas, sino la comunidad nos organizamos entre nosotros mismos. Entonces, no es un proceso natural, que emerge naturalmente. Y así como empezamos con la funeraria, después emergió una problemática de transporte y organizamos el transporte de la ciudad con más de 130 autobuses. Después emergió la necesidad de comida y salimos con los autobuses, le quitamos los asientos y empezamos a vender comida en los buses. Y ahí salieron los grandes mercados que ahorita vendemos más de 100 millones de dólares al año. Pero todo inverso en las comunidades, con los productores agrícolas, con la gente de los barrios más pobres, generando organización desde los mismos barrios. Y esto ha sido la historia de Cecosesola durante más de 56 años y es nuestra experiencia.
Powerful and beautiful. Es muy poderoso lo que nos acabas de decir, Gustavo. From the locals comes the answers. Any of our panelists would like to add to this question? Maddie, please.
I would just say that one of the principles that are in the tree that Yolanda presented is real participatory democracy. And that's a really important one. It runs through so many things because it's about taking, involving citizens in decision making, making sure it's relevant to them. And there's examples of this in the report. Obviously, Cecosesola is one of them. But we have others as well. For example, in India, there's a big movement called Eco-Swaraj. The Swaraj is from the Gandhian idea of self-rule, and it's been developed in combination with ecology. So it actually means more like radical ecological democracy. And this means down to the village level, people are working together on this kind of democratic decision-making to improve their lives and improve the nature in their local environments and build economies that can provide jobs and so on. And you'll see that there are several examples in Growing the Alternatives that show how this happens. And yes, I think we need more of that kind of approach to make things work, to support culturally appropriate local communities.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maddie. Anyone wants to add, or should I continue with the next question? Next question? Yes. Democracy here. It is important, always. Jiva from Zoom. What do you think, and this is a beautiful question, very important, what do you think a student can do about the global climate change? Who wants to answer? I know it's a tough one, I know. So I'll choose Maddie and Eve Chikun, and of course, anyone else would like to add, just go ahead. Maddie.
Well, there's a big movement to divest institutions from fossil fuel investments. And I think find out about that and encourage your institution to not be part of funding fossil fuels. And then, of course, it's what you study. So what are you studying for? Bring new ideas into the courses that you're doing. Choose courses that are going to be of benefit for the future and not necessarily going down the corporate for-profit route, but think more holistically in your choice of studies.
Thank you, Maddie. Alexander Sauda on Zoom, ask the next question. Dear experts, do you agree that producing more than we need with less labor by machines from the 1750s is linked to looting, exploiting other people made by the same people, and expanding due to higher military potential that have those who make it? This is the summary of a larger question. Who would like to start? Chicum or Jawande, would you like? Or Teresa, Manny, or Gustavo? This is having in consideration, of course, a little bit of history. So having that background, would you like to answer?
Yo quisiera agregar algo desde nuestra perspectiva en todo lo que es lo del cambio climático, lo de esa conciencia de que tenemos que actuar. Nosotros desde nuestra práctica es en las cosas más pequeñas, en las cosas más sencillas, porque yo creo que lo del amor al planeta no es un problema intelectual, de aprenderlo en la universidad, de leer libros, sino que yo tengo un ambiente junto con otras personas donde vea lo importante que es usar, por ejemplo, en nuestro caso, vasos plásticos en las reuniones. Consumíamos cerca de 100 vasos plásticos cada vez que nos reuníamos y tomábamos café. Eso lo empezamos a conversar y dijimos no más vasos plásticos o no más bolsas plásticas y no vendemos bolsas plásticas en nuestro mercado cooperativo. Entonces, para nosotros que nos movemos en el mundo popular, es una práctica pequeñita, pero que va siendo como el agua del mar, que una gotica va ahora dando una gran piedra. Entonces, nosotros realmente estamos un poquito como fuera de fase en todo esto, la cuestión de lo global, los planteamientos macro. Nosotros estamos en lo micro construyendo y creemos que incidimos de alguna manera en ese grandísimo problema global. Pero desde que cada uno de nosotros, nuestros hijos, nuestros vecinos, nuestra comunidad, cuide en lo que está en su alrededor. Y lo otro es, si respetamos a la persona que está a mi lado, también empiezo a aprender a respetar el planeta.
Simple as that, Teresa. Thank you very much. Simple things simple acts can sum to a higher thing. So absolutely. Shanta Soheli on Zoom. Most of the governance system are pure showcase of masculinity. The frustrating news is we have observed ultimate violation of human rights in the name of conservation, natural resource management. How can this issue be addressed globally to create a bigger movement? This is for Chiku, if you agree.
So I think that still gets back to what I've been talking about in terms of what solutions do we have. For most countries, I think in the global south, we've been taught forced solutions. And I think what you're talking about, the example you have just given, is an example of a forced solution, probably, that is there. And I think what is very important now is to begin to have, to raise critical consciousness among citizens, to understand what this means. Because if you come to countries like Malawi, and the agricultural systems and models that we have followed, mostly these are influenced by knowledge that comes from the global north. So really, I think it gets back to the concept of how do we localize knowledge, how do we appreciate knowledge from the global south, and how do we make sure that there is full participation and not just models that come from institutions that propagate forced solutions. So I think from my perspective as someone from the global south, it's really about participation of countries in the global south, participation of them to ensure that the knowledge and things that are working for them, the models that are working for them, are part of the global knowledge. Because most of the times, I think we experience exclusion in terms of knowledge management, what kind of knowledge should be popular and what knowledge should be adopted. And especially, I think it becomes a bit of a complicated problem if this such kind of knowledge is embedded in development aid. So really, I think that's where I think things are getting wrong for most of the time when it comes to what kind of agricultural model will work in light of the climate change crisis that the world is experiencing. So that aspect of exclusion, that aspect of who decides what knowledge works and how is it packaged and who profits and benefits from it, I think it's really a political question that has to be addressed if we are to come up with a model that works for everyone and a model that is indeed something that can work for the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Chikubutso. Emma Kabasia on Zoom. As a young European, what do you think is the best way to push for radical change in institutions which are deeply rooted in a profit-oriented framework? The EU Green New Deal is fundamentally a growth strategy and there seems to be no real discussions about post-growth regimes. Who would like to answer this question? Jawande?
Yeah, I was going to add, and Madeline might also pick it up, but I think one of the things we often talk about, and thanks for the question, is that we need a narrative shift. We need, I mean, part of the reason we're so locked in is almost like a stuckness in a particular mood and an inability to drive an alternative narrative. So like we want to see this massive shift in, as you say there's no real discussion. Well, we want to contribute, introduce, highlight, put on loudspeaker these alternatives and drive a global narrative shift so that it can't be ignored. At the moment, it can be ignored, I think, as Madeline was saying, because many times these alternatives are not front and center. And that's part of the machinery of the sort of the capitalist system, is to not center alternatives. So from a sort of story perspective, I would say ways in which, and I don't think there's any one way, but ways in which to be interested and committed to driving a narrative shift so that it shows up for us that these alternatives exist. I mean, Maddie, do you want to also take that question? Because you might have some.
Well, I'll just observe that in the first chapter of Growing the Alternatives, there's a piece from Fatima Kelleher, which is about green growth in Africa. Well, it's growth in Africa. Are we ready for degrowth or to talk about it? But she mentions green growth, and that's very, obviously this is coming from the EU and the global north, putting pressure on global south. And that means obviously extraction of resources. Green growth equals mining in Africa, or mining the deep seabed. And there's only one way of thinking about it, according to the EU. We also critique this in the idea of the circular economy, which has been co-opted by politicians, but also corporations, as a way of greenwashing. So it's like, oh, we're all going to be circular now, but we're not even going to think about slowing down the amount of resources that we're putting through the system. That doesn't come into the equation. And the solution for green growth is we're going to make billions of electric cars with lots of minerals in the batteries, instead of thinking about the way that we might design our cities to use less individual transport. So there's lots of shifts in mindsets that need to happen across all of the questions, which are, of course, very complicated. But that just gives you some idea of the bigger picture, really, and where these things are playing out.
Thank you, Maddie. Next question. Julia Ontañón on Zoom. How does the degrowth movement fit in building these alternative futures? Who would like to answer? Teresa, would you like to talk about this, the degrowth movement?
Voy a pedirle permiso
Habla, Gustavo.
a mi pareja. De hecho, nosotros repetimos, nosotros podemos hablar de nuestra experiencia. Nosotros no somos teóricos, no somos académicos, somos personas que estamos trabajando en las comunidades, ¿no? Nosotros simplemente no planificamos crecimiento. Nunca hemos dicho vamos a hacer esta actividad, no hemos dicho este año vamos a crecer tanto, no hacemos presupuesto económico, y recuerde que manejamos $100 millones al año. Simplemente los proyectos y las cosas que hacemos y el crecimiento emerge de las mismas actividades. La misma necesidad de la comunidad nos ha hecho crecer. Nosotros empezamos nuestro mercado con un autobús vendiendo 3 toneladas de verdura. Ahorita estamos vendiendo o movilizando 700 toneladas de verdura en 20 puntos de venta, abasteciendo al 40% de una población de más de 1 millón de habitantes. Y eso nunca fue planificado, nunca fue planificado. Empezamos con un pequeño centro de salud como un médico, y ahorita tenemos 9 centros de salud en los barrios de Barquisimeto y tenemos un hospital donde hacemos hasta 1.700 operaciones al año. Y al mismo tiempo atendemos más de 250.000 pacientes al año. Y nada de eso fue planificado, nada de eso fue... Y tampoco utilizamos financiamiento externo. O sea, si no tenemos el dinero para hacer algo, no lo hacemos. El dinero lo producimos nosotros mismos. Por lo tanto, lo que tratamos de hacer es como una referencia que de repente puede inspirar a otras personas que las cosas se pueden hacer diferentemente, que no tenemos que seguir ese modelo empresarial de un gerente, un supervisor, uno que manda el otro, compitiendo entre unos y otros para ver quién llega a subir en la escalera, si nosotros todos estamos en igualdad, en una relación equitativa, donde ninguno manda sobre el otro, sino que entre todos vamos llevando. Somos 1.300 trabajadores organizados en la red, y no hay ningún...
Bueno, bellísimo. Beautiful what you're explaining. And that's an alternative future. That's something different that we can think of in order to change what we have seen, and it's not really working. Would you like, Chikum, to add a bit to this question or to the answer?
Yes, so for Feminist MacroEconomic Alliance, I think really our passion is to see models that invest in well-being and care for people and the planet. Unfortunately, I think most of the models for growth are rooted in the whole idea of making profit. So Lily, I think this is why as Feminist MacroEconomic Alliance and Young Urban Women, we really want to be part of the degrowth model, looking at what is it that we can do as a world to ensure there is eco-sustainability, but there's also an approach that ensures that there is well-being of people in the planet and not necessarily prioritizing issues of profits. So Lily, I think for us as a movement from the Global South, we really have issues when it comes to prioritizing the GDP, prioritizing growth as countries, because this is where we are getting wrong. And I think most of the donors, most of the financial organizations, when they want to come and invest in the Global South, the entry point is already that we want to promote growth, what will promote industrialization. We make sure that there is an increase in the GDP. But the GDP will increase, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be an increase and there'll be improvement in the welfare of people. That we have seen from the Global South. So Lydia, when it comes to the question of what kind of economic model will work, what is it that we are talking about? That's why we are a bit jittery just to support growth. We want to see that there is growth in terms of well-being of people, in terms of care for the planet, for people and the planet, and not necessarily just about profits and the GDP. So I think that's my contribution when it comes to the question of growth, and why is it that probably we really want to support movements that want to see improvements in terms of welfare and care for people and the planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chikum. We have 2 more questions here, and we're heading towards the conclusion. So please, all of you, think about what would be very inspiring to our audience that have been captivated by your insights. So next question is simple, and anyone can answer it. It's over here. Okay, any tips? This is Cecosesola from Zoom. Any tips on how to highlight the values of these alternative principles and proposals to the politicians? Jawanda, maybe? Would you like?
I mean, it might be like a stuck record, but I mean, I am a storyteller, I'm a novelist, so I always come from that perspective. And I think sometimes we think of politicians as being somehow distinct or separate from our social spaces, but like, what are the stories that they are being exposed to and hearing? How are we using our voices as organizations, as individuals, as movements? So, for instance, and this might tie in with another question I spotted in the chat, asking about the role of, let's say, an organization like Greenpeace, which is a huge organization with a big voice. And I would say one of the important things would be to humbly acknowledge as Greenpeace that, you know, we're not starting something. This is something we are choosing to enter because we feel like you can't just do this work from the environmental lane, so to speak, and that we have to connect and we have to give platform to the many organizations that have been doing this work and indigenous peoples that have been holding this space about these alternatives. And so I would say, I'm trying to sort of answer those two questions at the same time, that that is one way, is to look for what are the platforms that people are listening to and put on those platforms the voices that need to be heard, so that the politicians or the whoever's, the policymakers, have no option but to pay attention. And I think that sort of answer for me personally comes from my real trust and belief in the power of storytelling.
Thank you, Jawande. We do have more questions, but since we're heading to our conclusions, I will read this one from Kenneth in Nicaragua, which we can complement with what you're already saying, but we can complement it with a little bit more of answer. So Kenneth, I'm going to read it in English. Hi, I'm Kenneth from Nicaragua. What role do research, theses, and tectonic reports on economic development play in societies where commercial exploitation is criticized? Does this research represent a step towards changing the culture and mind? Who would like to answer these questions, Maddie or Chikum? Or Gustavo, Teresa, or Manny? Maddie?
Yes, I mean, I'd say yes, it does represent a change. There has to be a big change in our cultural minds in order to allow all the things the ordinary things that are going on to become the important things, as opposed to the extraction of resources to make profit. I mean, that links back to the question about degrowth. We have to ask, well, what is all the growth for and who benefits? And we know, I mean, there was a report Monday by Oxfam, which showed how the top 1% of billionaires are equivalent to, you know, the amount that they consume is equivalent to millions of people's worth emissions in global south countries. And the same with the middle classes that sit underneath them. And so all of the extraction and the profit and the GDP isn't going to the people. So this is what we need to shift around and bring show that the alternatives are working, as we're seeing here. There's also some other great examples in growing the alternatives. For example, there are governments that are implementing well-being policies and well-being budgets, like New Zealand, Scotland, Wales, Finland, Iceland, and other ones that are joining in as well, or that have examples like Costa Rica and Bhutan, and they're all doing their this work according to their own local conditions, so it's relevant for them. And I think we should take inspiration from those examples. I don't think it's going to be an overnight change. It's not something sudden, because this involves, you know, big changes in the way that we think, changes in our ideas about profit. We have to kind of grow away from the idea that making money and profit and growth is the only way that shows our success as a society. It isn't. There are many more things that we need to think of. And to be properly human and relate to each other, we have to move away from that. So yes, a big cultural change.
Thank you, Maddie. Chikum, would you like to add to that question? To that answer? Okay, so I do have more questions here. This one, I think it's important, and I would love Jawande to answer. Natalie Thomas on Zoom, shouldn't Greenpeace be leading the change with relation to similar organizations that compete instead of uniting with communities like this? Would you like to answer that one, please?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Monica, and thanks, Natalie, for the question. I think, as you were saying, and I also wrote a bit in the chat, I mean, absolutely, like it's so important. There's no way we can do this singularly. And this isn't about competition or showing anybody up. I think the premise of this whole branch of work for Greenpeace is that it's done collaboratively and it's done through allyship from the start, particularly because as Greenpeace, we acknowledge that it's not our typical space. It's not the environmental lane. It's rather acknowledging that these lanes are part of the problem. These kind of silo approaches are part of the problem, and that we have to be working in collaboration across so-called issues to really dismantle the system. So we absolutely come from that space, and we have been and will continue to do collaboration. I mean, the Growing the Alternatives publication in itself is a collaboration with the wonderful people here, but also some of the contributors that aren't here with us today. We've had collaboration with Oxfam, so much alliance and kind of contiguity there with them and with several other organizations that we've identified and more. So again, if you have ideas, put them in the chat or find ways to connect with us to share that, because we're clear that's the way this work will get done in the end. Thank you.
Thank you. And this has been a great exchange of opinions, of knowledge. And before wrapping up the conversation, I'd like to ask our panelists if there is any final thoughts that you'd like to share. Let's begin with Chikum, and then Cecosesola, and then Jawande, or Maddie, or both of you. Please, Chikum.
Nosotros quisiéramos plantear algo.
Sigue. Dale, Teresa. We're going to begin with Teresa.
Ok. Bueno, nosotros lo que queremos es darle las gracias por esta posibilidad. Nosotros creemos en los intercambios, en la posibilidad de acercamiento, pero un elemento que mencionó Gustavo, que creemos que es muy importante, que desde las comunidades podemos generar los recursos para continuar supliendo las necesidades que vamos teniendo, pero que la manera con la cual vayamos superando esas dificultades tiene que ser de colaboración, de ayuda, para que no sea el modelo capitalista de la competencia, del quítate tú para ponerme yo, sino que sea realmente eso, porque si no vivimos en un entorno donde vamos construyendo algo diferente al capitalismo manipulador, muérgano, diríamos nosotros, no tenemos una narrativa diferente porque no lo hemos vivido. Nosotros tenemos la suerte, ya tenemos 56 años como Cecosesola, construyendo un día a día de una relación de respeto, de ayudarnos, hombres y mujeres, viejos y jóvenes, de colaboración, de eso, fundamentalmente el respeto. Entonces, bueno, invitamos a aquellos que quieran hacer contacto con nosotros a través de las redes, porque siempre estamos en ese intercambio de ayudarnos, y creemos que si una persona empieza a vivir en lo cotidiano relaciones diferentes, no capitalistas, sino de amor y de comprensión, esa persona va entendiendo su papel para ayudar al mundo y al cambio del mundo global.
Gracias, Teresa. Solamente me estoy imaginando cómo nuestros intérpretes pudieron traducir esa palabra fantástica latinoamericana que es muérgano. Es una gran palabra con mucho poder. So, Chikum,
Muérgano.
Brava, Teresa.
Brava, Teresa.
You're on mute, Monica.
I'm mute. I'm sorry. I was just figuring out, Chikum and Jawande and Maddie, how the interpreters were like realizing how to interpret her, that beautiful word from our Latino countries, that is muérgano. Well, so going into our conclusions, my dear Chikum, would you like to give us some lights in order to change our perspectives, to think different, to think out of the box, literally? Please go ahead. Chikum? Can you hear me, Chikum?
Hello?
Yes, please.
All right. Thank you so much. So from my perspective, when it comes to growing the alternatives, I think which will also be part of my concluding remarks, is that it is a collective responsibility. Number one, it starts with promoting civic participation and engagement. Number two, we are talking about increasing the role of states, ensuring that they meet their human rights obligation and not focus on meeting interests of the private sector or those that are interested with profit. And I think number three, most importantly, it's also about the global economy, making sure that those countries that are in the global north, not just countries, but also financial institutions, really understand the impact of the current model, economic model, which is neoliberal, which is capitalist, and what impact does this have on the welfare of people, especially in the global south. So really, I think that's my input when it comes to the growing of alternatives for a just and feminist future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will read one comment that is from Simon Ticehorst that was in the Zoom that we believe we should read here also. Degrowth challenges the assumption that all sectors of the economy need to grow, whether we need them to or not. Degrowth would be a more rational exploration of what we need to grow, beautiful, the alternatives, and what to be needs to degrow, fossil fuels, fast fashion, private jets, and jets. Thank you very much to Simon. So please, now we're going to continue with, I believe, Maddie or Yewande to conclude, and then we can go once again, if you want, to Gustavo and maybe Manny to make your conclusions. Please.
Thank you. And yeah, Maddie, I don't know if you would also have something to add. I think for me to conclude is to acknowledge everybody here that's made this conversation possible and all the contributions, and to ride the wave of this sense of connection and community. This is exactly what we're talking about. It's in action, the collaboration, swapping ideas, getting inspired by one another, seeing the alternatives in action. So I would just, encourage everybody, and I'm giving myself the same advice, but to sort of leave the space and draw on that energy and continue it. Definitely from our perspective, we really invite you to engage with growing the alternatives, because it holds all these stories that have been shared today, and to pick it up as a call to action and as a way to challenge the system that we appear to be stuck in, and hope to see you all again in some way or other as we all go on this journey of growing the alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Yewande. And actually, this is also very important to add. Growing the alternatives also includes an interactive crowdsourced map with detailed information and the location of the communities, organizations, and government initiatives featured in the publication, as well as new examples that people around the world can now submit. Maddie?
I just would concur with Yewande and encourage people to read the report and see how we've tried to set out pathways to how alternative futures could come into being based on the principles and the proposals that we made. I think it's important to think as much as possible and to continue the conversation and see where it takes us, because we can't really predict that. But together we could hopefully make it an interesting and fruitful path that will tackle some of the problems that we're facing at the moment.
Absolutely. Teresa, Gustavo, Manny, ¿les gustaría hacer una conclusión para dejar hoy en este panel que hemos tenido, en esta conversación? I think I'm not seeing Teresa and Gustavo and Manny for some reason. Are they? Oh, here they are. Cecosesola. So, sus conclusiones. Sí, se fueron, pero ya están con nosotros. They're back.
Estamos en conclusión. Recuerda que se nos cayó un momentico aquí la señal, entonces nos perdimos un poco. No sé, volviendo a nuestra práctica diaria, nosotros el crecimiento lo controlamos o no nos hace daño porque nunca nos financiamos externamente. Inclusive tenemos un fondo de financiamiento interno y cuando entra una nueva cooperativa no tiene ninguna opción a ese financiamiento hasta que demuestre con su propio esfuerzo lo que puede hacer. De esa manera vamos creciendo de una manera natural. Otra cosa que quisiera detallar es que nosotros concebimos el trabajo económico como una escuela de transformación cultural, y el trabajo simplemente son las paredes, la actividad económica son como las paredes de la escuela. Y permanentemente estamos educándonos unos a los otros, aprendiendo unos a los otros. Tenemos como filosofía que no es que no hay que dar el pescado y hay que enseñar a pescar, sino que pescamos juntos. No hay nadie que tiene toda la sabiduría, sino que todos vamos aprendiendo y nos vamos transformando culturalmente para poder trabajar fuera de la lógica y las emociones del sistema capitalista. Ese es lo fundamental de Cecosesola, que somos una escuela de transformación cultural para poder funcionar con otros criterios totalmente diferentes a la empresa capitalista. Como dijo Teresa, están todos invitados. Aquí recibimos muchas personas de todas partes del mundo, siempre estamos en contacto y están los brazos abiertos para recibirlos aquí en Barquisimeto.
Abrazo muy grande para Cecosesola. Manny, ¿quieres agregar algo, Teresa? ¿O es...?
Sí, por supuesto. De verdad que me parece algo muy bonito que tengamos la oportunidad entre todas estas organizaciones y grupos de personas de que tengamos un momento de encuentro entre todos para que compartamos nuestras experiencias y nuestra vivencia en cada una de las luchas que estamos teniendo. Y el mensaje que nos llevamos es que no somos los únicos en el mundo que estamos buscando una nueva alternativa o buscar una ayuda para la sociedad, sino que es increíble ver cómo en tantos países hay tantos grupos de personas que están luchando, que a pesar de que estén librando su propia lucha, nos veamos todos como un grupo, como un equipo, que tenemos una lucha colectiva que no es solamente para mejorar o para generar un cambio en nuestro país por el sistema capitalista que llevamos, sino que es una lucha que tenemos todos para mejorar nuestro planeta. Que es la reflexión que nos podemos llevar, Epa. No son luchas individuales que tenemos, sino que es una lucha que tenemos entre todos colectiva para mejorar el mundo en el que habitamos.
Manny, thank you very much. Teresa? Good? You're good? Okay.
Muchas gracias.
Fantastic, fantastic. So thank you for those reflections. As we conclude this webinar, let's reflect on the critical importance of exploring alternative socioeconomic models together and how we can contribute to this discussion to forge a more sustainable, equitable, and just future. Our panelists have provided valuable insight into the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Thank you to our panelists and the audience, of course, for joining and mention. This is a mention that I have to do because it is very important and it's related to the conversation, but it will continue. Read the publication showcasing alternatives to move beyond GDP and join us in the website that we shared on the chat so you can have a broader vision of what's going on. And of course, once again, thank you very much to Gustavo Salas, Teresa Correa, Manny Melendez from Cecosesola Cooperative, Chikumbutso Gossi, thank you very much for the Malawi Feminist Macroeconomics Alliance. It's beautiful what you're doing there. And of course, it was very enlightening to see the girls talking about macroeconomics and all the ideas that they have. They're how would you say? I say always that listening to young people, it's such an important task that we all have to do. They have new ideas, but they have a different vision and perspective about what we have to, that we're not seeing because we're just in another phase of our lives. So it's beautiful what you're doing. All the people and organizations who contribute to these 3 chapters of the Growing the Alternatives publication, thank you very much too. Madeleine Cobbing, Jewande Omotoso, and all the Greenpeace team behind this project, San and Camilo, muchas gracias. All the people who joined today from all over the world in Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube, and who will continue watching this video because this video is going to be there so you can all revisit and understand what we said here, what we share here. I encourage everyone to continue exploring and supporting initiatives that are working towards alternative socioeconomic models and to access the latest edition of Growing the Alternative publications. Let's collectively strive to create a world where economic prosperity aligns with environmental sustainability and social justice. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, night, and tomorrow.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you very much.
Bye.